Prime Minister Mark Carney is speaking publicly for the first time about Maduro's capture. He addressed the situation in Venezuela earlier this morning ahead of a key meeting in Ukraine.
From our perspective, the removal of an illegitimate, corrupt, repressive government or leader, Mr. Maduro, is welcome news. It creates the possibility for democratic transition in Venezuela. We very much support that. We're available to support that, and we urge that to happen in a peaceful transition.
That's Prime Minister Carney speaking earlier to reporters in Paris. I misspoke, not in Ukraine, on Ukraine. He is meeting there with other world leaders to discuss a potential ceasefire between Ukraine and Russia. And we'll have more on those talks later in this hour. First, though, Janice McGregor joins us live from Ottawa with more on the Prime Minister's reaction to this situation. Janice, we heard Mark Carney's support for the removal of Nicolas Maduro. He also talked about how Venezuela's future could affect Canada. What did he say about that?
Yeah, his statement there consistent with the position of Canadian foreign policy. You know, you think going back to 2018, the first refusal to accept the government of Nicolas Maduro, Canada's work under then Foreign Affairs Minister Chrystia Freeland with the Lima Group. Remember that group of countries in the Western Hemisphere that were trying to work towards a place of legitimate democratic elections in Venezuela. That group, notably the U.S. sort of on the outside of that group, even back then during the first Trump administration, because the Americans even then wouldn't rule out some kind of military intervention to remove Maduro. Interesting now in light of the events of the past weekend. Mark Carney, though, was specifically asked by a reporter this morning about where things go from here economically for Canada in light of Donald Trump's explicit statement about going in militarily because he wanted to get the oil out of Venezuela for American resource companies. And what impact that was going to have for Canada's oil industry and this push for a new pipeline to the West Coast, assuming that at some point American oil companies are able to invest in Venezuela once more. Here's what the Prime Minister said on that.
It's been our view, and we're working towards this, that Canadian oil will be competitive because it is low risk, clearly low risk. Low cost, the marginal costs, there's been huge progress in getting down the costs, and low carbon, which is what the Pathways project, carbon capture, will bring.
We've seen commentary from some MAGA influencers in the U.S. that this now means that Canada has fewer cards to play, for example, in trade negotiations, that the U.S. would need Canadian oil as much. This has sparked concern. We've seen it particularly some conservative commentators reacting with some alarm to this. I think the Prime Minister's remarks today could be taken as an attempt to reassure people, but also double down on what the government strategy has been to this point in terms of trying to get building infrastructure again in this country for Canada's resource sector, while also emphasizing the ways that Canada is different from Venezuela. Most notably, political stability, that it can offer investors, rule of law and assurances on that front, but also the assets that Canada brings to the table with respect to its efforts to get the carbon footprint of its oil industry down in a way that perhaps Venezuela wouldn't offer for those markets that are concerned about that. I want to show you, though, earlier this morning, the leader of the opposition, Pierre Poilievre, with a tweet talking about the situation in Venezuela, specifically saying that this now means that Canada, in Pierre Poilievre's words, must race to approve a pipeline to the Pacific coast and move millions of barrels of Canadian oil per day overseas to break the dependence on one customer. He has written to the Prime Minister. It's a 2-page letter. I can't read it all to you right now, but his basic point is that every barrel of oil that the Americans pivot to purchasing from Venezuela perhaps will be oil that is no longer purchased from a Canadian source, and new markets now becoming more urgent for Canada, reiterating in this letter, as he has before, that he thinks the Major Projects Office, for example, and some of the strategies that the Carney government is using, its changes to the approval process, are, in his words, bureaucratic games, that the signing ceremony with Alberta Premier Danielle Smith was symbolic, Poilievre calls it, and calling on the government to, within 60 days of receiving Alberta's specific proposal for a pipeline, to approve it, pointing out that the legal authority to approve that rests only with the federal government since the passage of C5 early last summer. So calling for the federal government to get out of the way on pipeline building, Carney today trying to emphasize the government strategy is on moving quickly, but not perhaps in the direct way that Poilievre is calling for.
It is worth underscoring, Janice, isn't it, though, that many commentators and analysts have told us that getting oil out of Venezuela, even if it remains stable, which is unclear at the moment, will take years, a decade, maybe more. So it's not tomorrow or next year.
And that's where the timelines get really interesting, right? Especially Carney's point today was that this can be low cost. Why is that? Well, because they are building infrastructure, because they have infrastructure, because there are already sort of players in the Canadian industry who would be, notwithstanding the fact that they say they need more pipelines, but are already much closer to being able to deliver more than the situation in Venezuela, where that industry and its infrastructure, its facilities, have been neglected for years. So if speed is the consideration, the timeline in Canada's favor, that one of the things the Prime Minister, I'm sure, would be emphasizing as words of reassurance to people in this moment. Down the road, there is a hypothetical possibility that Venezuela is, peaceful and stable and has democratic government again. But I think events on the ground suggest we are not at that place right now, and that place could be some distance away.
And Janice, we're going to tap you a little later in the hour to talk more about the politics of what Carney has said in Paris this morning. Lots there to chew on. Thank you.
You're welcome.